It is no secret what a special talent that Joel Embiid is at this point in his NBA career, but maybe people are still taking him for granted, and that is exactly what his former head coach Bill Self had to say about the former Kansas superstar and current Sixers centerpiece. I want to break down exactly what Bill Self had to say, why this praise hit so hard for me, and why I do think this is so notable, as well as touch on the newest addition to the Sixers, Guerschon Yabusele, who made his visit, officially arrived in Philadelphia, spoke to the media, and we got a clear idea of why he wanted to join the Sixers, what our expectations should be from him, and everything else. So let's dive right into things. I'm going to start off with the quote from Bill Self. This article as a whole writes that before Joel Embiid turned to an NBA star for the Philadelphia 76ers, he was a freshman at Kansas University looking to develop before heading to the draft. In one season with the Jayhawks, Embiid averaged 11.2 points and 8.1 rebounds before becoming the number 3 pick in the 2014 draft. And for what it's worth, if there was not the injury concern, he would have been the number 1 pick in the draft, but he did break his foot leading up to this draft, and thank the Lord that that did happen and he fell to the Sixers there. Now, the article continues to say that since then, Embiid has been phenomenal. Despite his injury trouble, the big fella has turned into one of the best players in the league and was named MVP in 2023. Had he not been hurt in the 23-24 season, he likely would have won his second consecutive MVP, as he was putting up the numbers comparable to Wilt Chamberlain. Kansas coach Bill Self joined Bleacher Report and discussed what Embiid was like at Kansas and has been impressed with what he's been able to do in the league. And the quote from Bill Self is, quote, "Well, I'd like for us to take credit that we taught him everything he did in the 9 months he was here, but he's the most talented guy I've ever been around, hands down." And that is some strong praise from a pretty legendary head coach who's been around quite a large amount of talent throughout his professional career at Kansas and beyond, and the other stops that he has gone on. Bill Self has coached a lot of really good basketball players, and for him to say that Joel Embiid is the most talented player that he has ever coached is some really high praise there. Now, I did want to reflect a little bit on Joel Embiid specifically. Taking a peek at what he looked like at Kansas did hit a little hard for me. Just look at this guy and kind of the different, his body form at this time. He's obviously put on a ton of muscle, a ton of weight, and even grown since this point, that he's a couple inches bigger than he was during that season at Kansas. I think it's really cool when you do reflect on the entire journey that Joel Embiid has gone on, from taking a chance on himself, leaving Yaounde, Cameroon, to come a guy who really had pretty much zero basketball skill when he first did come over to the United States, and ultimately turning into a player who's capable of averaging 34.7 points per game, just video game type numbers on a yearly basis at this point. Now, we know what he does from a statistical standpoint. And there is a conversation that needs to be had, or will continue to be had, about the style of his play and how this can directly equate to a Sixers championship. But one of the things that I find kind of refreshing and optimistic when looking at Joel, yes, you can have the injury concerns. Yes, you can have reasons to nitpick, and he has been far from the perfect player coming down the stretch in this. But I can't honestly look myself in the mirror and think that Joel Embiid is the reason that this team lost out of the playoffs in any of these seasons. Every single year, and you can say I'm making excuses for the guy, there's other reasons that I find bigger than Joel. And with this year specifically coming up, I have more reasons than ever to be optimistic. It's because that we know the leap that a guy like Tyrese Maxey is about to go on. We know what the addition of Paul George means to this Sixers team, that there is a legitimate backup in Andre Drummond and him being able to fill minutes off the floor. And perhaps what I'm most excited about in quite some time, or at least at this current moment, is the addition of Guerschon Yabusele. So I did want to start off with what Geurschon said about Joel specifically when speaking to the media today, and shout out to Sam DiGiovanni of Clutch Points for tweeting out that quote, he's one of the best bigs in the world. So dominant. His passion to play the game is really important, and for me to be able to be here, I want to join in and be a part of it. He also was very clear on I can play whatever role the Sixers team needs. He was asked specifically about his kind of preference to be playing in like a small ball 5 role, which is pretty much what he saw in his first stint at the NBA. And he said once again that he's open to whatever, but we'll do whatever this team needs. He's not tied to that by any means. And I think the most likely outcome here is that will not be his role with the Sixers team. It's pretty clear to me that he's put in the work to become a better perimeter shooter, to open up the ability to be a true power forward. And that's something that the Sixers team needs overall. Now, a couple quotes that I also think were really cool as far as Yabusele here. I'll start off with kind of being asked about his improvement. Shout out to Derek Barnard here, who tweets out that Guerschon Yabusele on how he's grown since his last stint in the NBA, quote, "Mentally, the way that I take stuff, the way that it comes, the way that I control, the way that I play. Obviously, my skills as a basketball player have evolved also, but I learned a lot since 2019. And I do think that that is the biggest storyline with Yabusele as a whole, is this is a different person and player since his first stint in the NBA here. That sometimes guys take the opportunity for granted, that when you're growing up and you are this talented basketball player, have these high expectations, a guy that was the 16th overall pick. You kind of think the red carpet's going to be there for you to pave a lane, and that's just unfortunately not the reality of the NBA. It will chew you up and spit you out if it lets you, and that's kind of what happened to Geurschon here. So he is very thankful for this opportunity and expressed that just as much, that he was directly asked, what was it about these Sixers that stood out for being an opportunity? Why did you decide to ultimately take this leap? And he replied that, quote, I feel like that they were the only team that would give me a shot. It was just a situation, and everything looks pretty good for me, so I'm excited to join in on the team. And he continued on kind of speaking on this answer, acknowledging that he spoke with Nick Nurse, that he really believed in the vision that Nurse had established for him. That's what I think is really unique about this being such a late offseason addition, is it's such a clear fit on the Sixers team, that we know what was a position of need is exactly what he can address as a high-effort rebounder, a guy who still can stretch the floor and shoot threes. And to pull up the depth chart exactly, I'm pretty optimistic about where he slots in here. That I know when looking at this, that we don't see where Guerschon Yabusele is fully going to fit in, but when kind of looking at what the roster projects at, Caleb Martin is a guy that I'm very excited about on the Sixers team, but I'm not confident can be that power forward on every matchup basis. I do think there's a world where we're talking about him as the cleanest fit in certain matchups. For example, playing against the Milwaukee Bucks in the opening night. I'm not saying that Yabusele is going to climb in the starting lineup. I think it's probably unlikely that happens over the duration of the season. If there is any sort of kind of roster move or within the starting lineup, it is probably Kelly Oubre that I would expect to drop to the bench. I think there is an argument to be made that his impact could be best felt as a spark plug off the bench. I certainly felt that way last year, but I don't think that Yabusele is going to be knocking down that door in the short term, but this is far more than a 14th man. Now, when looking down the roster and the options this Sixers team has, it's pretty clear that I think he can make a more immediate impact at 28 years old than a guy like Ricky Council IV, than a guy like Jared McCain, than a guy like Adem Bona. Those are three guys right there that I think automatically climbs in front of. And then even a player like Reggie Jackson, while you can make the case that there's obviously a much more lengthy NBA resume for Reggie Jackson, when just talking about what the Sixers team needs, Guerschon Yabusele checks a lot of those boxes here. Now, granted, none of this universe of the Sixers happens without Joel Embiid. And I do want to bring it back to that, to once again acknowledge what this guy brings to the table here. We know the skills, and I do love that Bill Self is still fighting the good fight, sticking up for his guy, who obviously spent the one-and-done year in Kansas there. And I do think it's important to note that all of this still will fall on Joel Embiid's shoulders at the time. That conversation that I kind of brushed off about the style, it is now this two-way street, this give and take that Joel Embiid has to accept as well. That no, it has not solely been his fault in those playoff shortcomings, but now it has to be. It has to be Joel Embiid being the guy who falls on the sword. You have to lean on the other guys when the time is right and take over when that opportunity is on the table. This is the first year that I fully feel confident holding him down to the fire and saying this has to be the year. It felt like these past couple seasons, there was so much living in limbo that last year, going into last season, James Harden's still technically on the Sixers roster, and Daryl Morey playing the game of chicken of I'm not making a deal until I get my desired outcome. And this is just 2 years before where we're doing the same dance with Ben Simmons there. And when you flash back to before that, we did not have the version of Joel Embiid that steps in front of us. The MVP version, the guy that is that alpha, can be a lead dog on a team. He was not that in 2018-19 and around that era. So now we know who Joel Embiid is as a player. We know that this is the fully polished version of him as an NBA basketball player. Maybe he does still continue to take some strides forward, but this is the time to judge Joel Embiid. Is it later than some? Sure. But I also think it is a little, I guess, misleading to have him labeled as a loser, because I think with every player, you're a loser until you're not. That with Giannis, there was the questions of, can this guy ever win a championship as a 1A? There was so much buzz leading up to that season, which they did go over that championship hump of, it's time to force out he can't be a number one on a championship team. Nikola Jokic is a guy who there were questions about, can this dude's game translate in the playoffs? Is his defensive ability capable of just keeping a championship caliber team afloat? And there were questions about that until he did it. With Joel Embiid, it's the exact same thing. If he finds a way to have this postseason success to truly take the Sixers team on a championship hump, the conversations around the big fella are going to be a lot different. So hopefully Guerschon Yabusele is along for the ride. Hopefully every other member of the Sixers team is strapped up and ready for battle this year. And hopefully Joel Embiid is ready to look himself in the mirror and realize that this has to be the year. But let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you have any opinions on Bill Self giving his thoughts on that? I love that he's sticking up for this guy, and I think more people around the Joel Embiid circle should do that. That it feels like there's a lot of players out there that do a nice job kind of manipulating the media in a way to send a messages and that boost them up a little bit. I don't think Joel is one of those guys by any definition. That sure, he takes his Twitter jabs and makes his comments here and there, but overall, I don't think that he's a pro media player or a guy that is pushed in the media in a positive way, than the way that I think his talent really dictates and deserves. So shout out to Bill Self for putting himself out there. Shout out to you guys for tuning into this video here. If you have not already, make sure you smash that subscribe button, dropping a like on this video, and I'll be talking with you next time right here on Sixers Digest. Peace.